You're listening to Parasearch Radio. News, views and reviews from the world of the paranormal from across the UK and beyond. Find us on Facebook, Twitter and the World Wide Web. The views and opinions expressed by presenters and guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of Parasearch Radio or their affiliates and sponsors. Listener discretion is advised.
And good evening, everybody, and welcome to tonight's episode of Haunted Histories on Parasearch Radio with yours truly, Penny G. Morgan. Now, I'm not going to chat too long because I've got a stonker of an interview to play out for you shortly, but just a couple of little things I just want to mention. I've been doing a bit of investigating, which you're going to hear about in tonight's interview, but I've also released my second book. So it's sitting there nicely on my shelf next to Parasearch's book that was released a few weeks ago called The Book of Parasearch, which, you know, get yourself a copy. That's full of all of our blogs. Well, my new book is called A Haunted Experiment. It's available now on Kindle and in hard copy on Amazon if you want to grab one. It's already having a few very nice reviews being said about it from people. I think Chris Chelt of Haunted Houses is reading it, and he said not only is it opening his mind, it's also teaching him a new vocabulary, which is always good. 2 for the price of 1. But I'm not going to talk much longer because I want to play you tonight's interview because it is that good. Are you ready? So, as many of you know, I got the opportunity on Friday to go to somewhere that is, well, it's meant to be one of the most haunted hotels in Britain. And it's in Warwickshire. It's very close to Shakespeare's birthplace, Stratford upon Avon. And I was incredibly excited because I was about to meet my history twin. We got to talk, it was about 6 months ago when we did a show on Edinburgh together, and we'd never spoken up until that point, and I think we chatted for nearly 3.5 hours in total. We hit it off so much so that I think it was Andy Saw from Haunted Magazine coined us the Cagney and Lacey of the paranormal. It is the one, the only Jayne Harris. How you doing, my darling?
Hello, what an intro. Wow. How are you?
I'm all right, thank you, Lacey. How have you recovered from Friday yet?
I have, Cagney, yeah, just about. Yes, the voice is almost back to, it's about 90% back.
Good. You see, Jane's had a stinking cold and she was refusing to sort of breathe near anyone on Friday when we were all hugging her, and in the end it was just like, sod it, if I'm going to have caught it, mate, I've caught it by now, just give us a cuddle. And it was lovely, wasn't it? Because you and I have spoken quite a few times now. We've chatted on Facebook, we've chatted doing shows and stuff, and you were just saying to me off air that it was kind of surreal that we were going to finally get to meet.
Yeah, but and I was saying, you know, obviously things happen, don't they? People have to cancel when you book something months in advance. You never know what's going to come up. And I just kept thinking, I hope Henny doesn't cancel. Because I'd had a few, you know, drop out, which, like I say, it happens. Yeah. But I was just so pleased when I saw you walk in. I was just here. Yay. And you were instantly recognisable. You totally, you know, what I expected. Yes, of course.
Oh, okay.
You were.
Okay.
Beautiful lady.
Oh, thank you, darling. Thank you. Well, obviously your husband likes me now as well, doesn't he?
He does, yes. He's got a new fan, hasn't he?
Well, he is rather beautiful. Apart from the fact he tried to scare the living bejesus out of us in room 7, but we'll talk about that one in a minute. Okay. It still makes me chuckle. I'm still laughing about that now. I'm telling people the story and I'm actually killing myself laughing whilst I'm telling it. It's going to go down in, was it the annals of history or whatever the saying is of it's going to have to be written about at some point as well because it was just hilarious. But anyway, we were at the lovely Ettington Park in Warwickshire. What first attracted you to the 1,000-year-old site of Ettington Park, Jayne?
It's just your absolute archetypal haunted looking house, isn't it? You know, the Adams family could live there. And I'd never been, but I knew the building. You know, you see a picture of it online and you think, yeah, I know where that is. Hill House from the old film, The Haunting. And when I found out it was a hotel, I thought, this is good. And we went for a night there, and we almost did, myself and my husband, we did our own kind of little investigation. We went in a chapel, and we could just feel the energy that was there. And in reception, they're not overly keen on discussing their ghost stories, but if you ask them, there is a document that's in one of the drawers that was done by an old night porter, and they will give it out to people who ask. And I had one of these, and it was just fascinating. In total, they think that there are about 21 ghosts, because that's based on people's reports, their experiences, things they've seen and heard. And it's just been so many different things. It's had all of these different incarnations, from being a family home, of course, to being a prisoner of war camp, to a hospital, to a nursing home, to a nightclub, to a boarding school. That building has seen a lot. So when I knew that we might potentially have the chance to investigate, although it did take at least probably 18 months for me to convince them, that we weren't satanic weirdos and that we weren't about to summon something. I just could not resist. It's gorgeous, and it's got such a rich, long history that it was
definitely irresistible. Yeah, no, definitely. And as I say, it's been there for, in some form, some way, shape or another, for over 1,000 years. Goes all the way back to, the Saxon era, really, doesn't it? The area of Ettington itself. So we've got quite a lot to sort of look into if we wanted to do a full history thing, but we've only got 55 minutes left, so I don't think we're going to be able to cover 1,000 years. So I'm going to cherry pick a few little bits. Now, the family that owned it, do they still own it? The same family? Do they lease it?
The Shirley family, they lease it to hand-picked hotels, so they do still own it and the estate,
Yeah, so their name actually came from a name, Sawallis, which actually goes even further back. I found the original Saxon spelling of it was Saswab, or Saswab. And they changed it to the name Shirley when some of them moved to a place called Shirley in Derbyshire. So they decided that Shirley may sound a bit easier. Or there's probably a bit more to it than that, but I'm sort of paraphrasing what actually happened. Now, one of the first places we got to visit when we were there, and I'll say we got to visit. We didn't get to sort of the run of the whole hotel because it was still running as a hotel. It still had functions going on. It had people staying there who, a few of them were giving us some very strange looks as we're wandering about. A lot of us dressed in black, carrying weird flashing, weird flashing bits of equipment and stuff, and dolls and things like that. But we got to visit a few rooms. We got to visit a part called the Long Gallery, which to me looks like an upside down ship. The library, was it the library area was our main?
Yes.
That was called the library, wasn't it? Room 7, the indoor chapel, and the outdoor chapel is probably the best way to describe it. Now, we'll start off in the outdoor chapel. And you were telling us, giving us a sort of a very brief sort of history, that was built in 11 something or other, the original part. Was that correct?
Yeah, 12th century.
12th century,
I can't quote the exact year, but yes, it's 12th century. It's in the Domesday Book, but when it's listed in the Domesday Book in 1086, it's described as being in a very poor state then. So there was something there obviously before that. But that chapel, was built in the 12th century. It's now more or less a ruin, isn't it? The only bit that you've got remaining is the family crypt, really, the family chapel, which is fairly small. Family members are buried there, and, there are, or were, small family services, I imagine. But I find that a really peaceful place. I mean, actually, that church, that was the original church for the village of Lower Ettington, which isn't there anymore. It ran adjacent to the church. And so some of the land there at the back of the church there, that's the old graveyard to the village.
Right.
So when the village was enclosed, because the Black Death came, all of the children were brought to Ettington, but of course a lot of the plague victims, they were buried there.
Right.
So lots of unmarked graves and only a few remaining. There is one grave actually, which is it's just quite chilling, but it's one of the two children who drowned in the river around 1800, and it has two children's faces on the gravestone. It's just like a little boy and a little girl, but you can't read the writing, so you can't see the exact dates or the names or anything.
Right.
But I liked it in there.
Yeah, I did. But you were saying about the church and the plague and stuff. This is one of the first historical facts I remember learning when I was younger. Is when you go to a village and the village seems like half a mile away from the church, and it's like, well, surely the village was built around the church. And then when you start to look into the history of the village, you find out that there was a plague. Excuse me. So they moved the village, but because the church was this big stone building, not very easy to move, they left the church where it was, sometimes in the middle of nowhere now, and the village moved to try and get away from the plague.
That's it, yeah.
Which I find fascinating.
They created, I think they called it Higher Ettington. So Lower Ettington that had been was more or less wiped out, I think. I mean, when they enclosed villages, that is what they did. No one in, no one out, basically, except children. They did remove the children. But I can only assume that everyone that was left in that enclosed village perished because, how could they not? You couldn't treat them if they had it, they had it. Yeah. And so once they had all gone, they created Higher Ettington, which was the next village just a little bit further out. So, that's why now when you're at the church, you think, well, why is there a church in the grounds of a hotel? It doesn't seem to make sense, but...
I know there's one I think it's in Norfolk, and it's literally in the middle of a field. You have to hike across 2 fields to get to it. And people used to say, well, that's a bit stupid. Why put a church in the middle of a field? Yet when you look at the old tithe maps from sort of 1500s, you'll see why. You'll see there was a village around it. And then when you look into the history, you work out what happened to the village, because, it wasn't stone buildings and everything. It was wood huts and things that were almost quite easy to collapse and get rid of and move elsewhere. But the church, that wasn't the first place that I investigated that night with the little crew I was with. And I must give a shout out to Steve Higgins of Hickey Pop, because he's written a brilliant little article on the investigation and working with you guys, and it's incredibly complimentary. I am going to be having words with him that he said he didn't want to mention any of the other names in his group because the article was meant to be about Jayne Harris. My ego is really suffering for that one right now. I will be having words with him, tongue in cheek, because I think it's a brilliant article and it was very, very well deserved. But he was in my group that I was with, as was the psychic artist Andy Moore, who we're going to be talking about. I'm going to talk about as well in a minute. Other people who really may know, Phil and Mark from Barry's team, GPS, MJ Dixon from Sage, a lovely lady by the name of Paula, who was possibly one of the nicest people I have ever met in my entire life. I think that was everyone in my group. If I've forgotten anyone, I do apologise. But we went into the church and one of the first things we did, we started doing some EVP work, didn't we? Sort of calling out to see if we could get any answers. And that was quite instant and quite... Have you had a chance to listen back to it yet?
I've uploaded the ones that I had from in there. Now, right. Penny,
Go on.
You tell me you haven't listened to them, you haven't heard it. No. I'm not going to spoil it for you. You need to listen to it. Okay.
Oh, have you put it online?
I only popped them up yesterday. You have a look.
I've been working flat out, mate. I didn't finish my day job till 7:45 last night, and by that point I had to have tea and then go to bed, and I've been out today. Maybe that's my reason.
Well, yeah, when you get a chance, have a listen, because there are some in there. And now I won't spoil it for you now. I was going to mention something, but I won't mention it. It did surprise me, actually, because my initial plan in the chapel was to start with Echo Vox. So because the acoustics in there are so brilliant anyway, I had the microphone and the speaker and, I was going to give that a go. But for some reason, it did just feel right. We stood quite silently for a moment or two, and I just felt, actually, let's just call out and see. And we did. I mean, I got the old handy speaker out and we replayed some of them. And you could even, it's generally quite difficult, isn't it, to hear very clear responses at the time. So you play it back and normally it's either so faint or it's a whisper or you've got other background sounds that are coming in, like the wind. It was quite windy, wasn't it?
It was very windy that night. Yeah, it was very windy, yeah.
And that was nothing to do with the meal we'd had before, was it?
The chilli, no. That was delicious. I know some people were saying, it's not sitting. Oh, my veggie chilli was lovely. I enjoyed it.
I had the pulled pork.
Oh, did you? Oh, no.
Yeah.
Veggie chilli for me.
Yeah, it was good. I was pleased with the food. But anyway, I digress.
Yes.
So the EVP was interesting. And I don't know whether to tell you now, because I don't know whether
You've got to tell me now.
Okay. So there is an EVP that absolutely 100% says my name. When I say, I mean, I think it was the first thing I asked. I said, my name's Jayne. Can you introduce yourself to me, please? And it's faint, but it says that's Jayne. And when I enhanced it and I even slowed it down, the Jayne is so clear. When you listen to it, you'll see what I mean. Wear headphones if you can. Okay. It's just there. It's so clear. So then we asked a few other things. And then you asked, can you tell me which war you fought in? Mm-hmm. And there's a response which to me sounds unmistakable. And it says Agincourt.
Really?
Yes. Now, I looked into that, and there was a Shirley, Sir Ralph Shirley, who did fight at Agincourt with Henry V. But he's not buried there. He died overseas. That in itself is interesting because I remember, I don't know if you remember, Andy kept saying something about a military man who died overseas.
He did, yeah.
But he was thinking it was linked to the other gentleman, the gentleman that he drew.
Horatio.
Horatio, which I'm wondering now, was he picking up on two different personalities? I don't know. But yes, those EVPs were very, very interesting in there.
They were. I mean, the only reason I asked that, because afterwards MJ was like, MJ Dixon was, why did you ask that question? And I said, it seemed the right question to ask. I said, I tend to just let my imagination go and see what pops in. Rather than ask the standard sort of, how old were you when you died? Do you know you're dead? Did you live here? All those kind of things. I tend to just sort of, not quite let my imagination drift, but I try and almost make myself open to suggestion as to what, if there's something there, it wants me to ask. Which is why I asked that question.
It's a good idea, isn't it, actually? Because, you know, if you think of yourself, if you were sort of floating around in spirit, or if no one had spoken to you for hundreds of years, then you would want to give people something of yourself, wouldn't you? You know, a historical fact, something about you, not just, you know, as you say, how old you were or your name, or can you repeat my name for me and all this kind of stuff. You'd want to give some facts, trying to validate that you are there.
Yeah. I mean, I know we had the DR60, is it DR60 going as well, and that seemed to pick up things. You could see when that was recording something, when the light went, but I haven't actually spoken to MJ since to find out what was on that. And I know Phil picked up stuff on his recorder, and hands up, I haven't had a chance to go through mine yet to see if I picked up anything on mine. But we did also have quite a bit of REM pod activity. But I think the interesting thing for me was when we would talk, I'd said that I'm the military thing, and then realising right behind you was the plaque for General Horatio Shirley, who fought in Crimea, the Crimean War. And the fact that Andy had drawn a picture a couple of days beforehand of a military person who he'd actually put the name Arthur next to, which does have relevance, as we'll mention in a sec. But he'd also written the Crimea. He had written 1846, which we know isn't the date of Crimea, but he'd written that as well. And that was quite strange because he'd done that a few days beforehand, I think, hadn't he? From almost like a vision.
Yeah, that's right. I've been on a few events now with Andy, and it's really fascinating because what seems to happen is that 2 or 3 days before, he will, as you say, either have visions or he'll say that this gentleman or this lady has visited him, been in his house, he's seen them standing there, and he's quickly drawn them. And then he'll bring his book with him on the evening, you know, and just show you and say, you know, does this mean anything? Is there any relevance to this? And he always draws them afterwards or paints them onto canvas sort of to give to people if that particular character had meant anything to them, you know, in the evening, if they'd connected with them. He just always does it. Apparently he's got loads and loads, room full of them, because, you know, it's kind of a way to memorialise them in a way, you know, these people that he's connected with.
I have to digress, though. He is an amazing artist. He was showing me shots of some of the normal work, sort of non-paranormal stuff he's done, and they took my breath away, some of the sort of acrylic work he's done.
Yeah.
So that's the first time I've ever worked with a psychic artist on an investigation. So I was finding that incredibly interesting. So he was getting through Horatio, or I mean, that's who we thought we were communicating with, but maybe it wasn't. Maybe it was the one who had mentioned about Agincourt. But who knows? Because as you were saying, you felt quite a lot of energies in that part of the hotel.
Yeah, and I remember I didn't hear it because I think I was across the other side of the chapel. But at one point, I know someone or a few people said that they'd heard almost like a thud or a bang coming from, I think they were the two sort of tombs, weren't they, at the back of one of the pews?
Yeah, I was sitting next to Phil and I didn't hear it because I was trying to listen to the spirit box because it had turned itself on in my bag, which happens sometimes. Yeah, we tried using the PSB11 and nothing had really come through, and I'd sort of laughed and said, oh, is that my spirit box turned on? And checked, no, it wasn't. I put it back in the bag, and about 2 seconds later I heard the and it's like the darn thing had turned itself on, which I have had happen a couple of times on investigations, and things were coming through, but I just couldn't quite make them out. And I know I had my ear down to it to try and hear it, at which point Phil leaps off the pew because he's sitting next to me going, what was that? And I said, what? And he said, I just heard someone shuffle along the pew behind us, like they were shuffling in for a service. And I didn't hear it, but say, because I was focused so much on listening to the spirit box, I genuinely didn't hear it. So that was, there was, I think that place alone would warrant a whole night investigation if you were able to.
Yeah, I mean, if you just had a few of you, it would be fascinating, wouldn't it, to go in there for a few hours? But that's the interesting thing, talk about, the distractions sometimes that you get with equipment, because we found when we went to Leominster Infirmary, the old workhouse, in December, we decided to make it a completely tech-free investigation, so no real kit at all other than, our own senses. We did have a spirit board, we had an automatic writer and a few things like that, but nothing electrical, nothing battery operated. I was just curious, really, more than anything, just to see how that would be, because you get so used to relying on these devices to give you signs and stuff. And when we got there, we thought, right, we've got sort of 5 hours ahead of us with nothing, with no kit. And it was a bit nerve-wracking, So, well, what do we do if nothing's happening? We need to be coming up with lots of different ways. But honestly, within 20 minutes, there was so much happening in one of the oldest rooms at the back of the building. And we all agreed at the end of the evening that it was because we were much more in tune ourselves. Yeah. We were much more aware of changes in the atmosphere, changes on people's faces. There were 3 cases where guests were convinced that they had seen transfiguration happening. They'd seen physical changes in the faces of other guests, and things like that you just miss potentially, if you're looking out for the beeping lights and the sounds and that. Yeah. So
I agree.
I think moving forward, I'd like to do more of those kind of back to basics investigations, but then it is good to bring in the kit occasionally just to validate, we could all just be imagining it.
I agree.
But but balance is good.
So did you get anything else in the chapel when you took other groups in there?
We had the final group I took in there. We had nothing, no activity on the REM pod, and I don't think we had any EVPs. But what we did have, which was really curious, and this is, I've had this before just with cheap torches. I've got a cheap LED, one of these that you put batteries in, but you have to push it to switch it on. You can stick them in cupboards and things, can't you? These small lights. I had one of those in there, and I put it up by the altar, I think, to start with, switched it on. And we were talking, and I think someone suggested, why don't we sing? So we were singing Ring a Ring a Roses to see if we could bring the children forward, and the light switched off. Now, it made me jump because I knew that you have to push it to switch it back on. And I knew there were new batteries in there. So I switched it back on, gave it a push, it came back on. And again, we started singing, the light went off. And it happened for about 5 or 10 minutes. And we started to actually ask, can you switch it back on? Can you switch it off? And we did seem to be getting the responses that we wanted. Brilliant. It was coming back on, it was going off. It didn't do it all evening, only in that sort of 15, 20-minute window, which I couldn't really explain. I mean, it wasn't earth-shattering, it wasn't run out of the place screaming kind of stuff, but it was just intriguing because I thought, how can that be happening? And if something is doing that, well, we can't hear the click, because when you push it, it does click. You can hear that someone switched it off. So I was thinking, well, how is that going off then? And then coming back on? So I don't know, can't explain it. But that was all that we had in the chapel. It was the most active when I was in there with you guys at the beginning.
It makes me wonder if certain spirits, and this is probably sort of teaching you how to butter bread, but certain spirits are more attracted to certain people to come through and talk to them. Because if with this last group you're saying it was more of a childlike spirit perhaps coming through playing with the light, whereas the group I was with, we seemed to have soldiers coming through. I just wonder what it is. Is it something that, I mean, I say I do joke about being the military magnet, but is it something, you know, do people give off certain, I don't know, wavelengths that certain spirits are more attuned into sort of catching on to manipulate that particular wavelength, that particular energy to sort of have the strength to come through and do something? Or is it just like we like certain people and we don't like certain people? It's an interesting, because if it had been the same sort of activity for the whole night, I would have said no. But the fact is, you're saying our group did seem to have the military stuff and male energies coming through, whereas the group you were saying there where you're singing Ring a Ring of Roses, it's almost more of a childlike.
Yeah, but then, of course, don't forget, you directly asked at the beginning, you know, which war did you fight in? So you're showing your interests.
But I wasn't the first person to ask a question. And the only reason I asked that was because I was seeing military images in my head with that sort of, you know, what I say about I try and drift off so that I don't ask your black and white questions. I was seeing military images, which is why I came out with it. I'm just as likely to say, so what was your husband's name? Or, I don't know, which workhouse were you a benefactor to? Do you know what I mean? I'm just as likely to come out with that. But it was just, I was getting the image of military, and I hadn't, if anyone's listening, I hadn't seen Andy's drawing at this point. This was just how I felt as I walked in. I hadn't looked at any of the plaques. I hadn't looked at the tombs. I just was getting this impression there was somebody in a uniform around.
It may well be, you know, you say that you're the military magnet, and it could be because, of course, that's your interest as well, isn't it? You know, that's what you're very knowledgeable about. So maybe, as you say, it is something where we all walk around with our conscious and our subconscious thoughts as part of us all the time.
Possibly.
And then, you know, who's to say that whoever is in the spirit realm isn't part of that greater consciousness and can't pick up on that and tune into it with people? I mean, I think I've had it before when we were filming the series, when I was with Barry and Chris. We would go to certain places, and it seemed very much that when they were children, they would only really interact with me or with Barry and I because we're parents. And Chris never seemed to have a stronger connection when he was children. It was always, you know, the fathers or the mothers, you know, the adults that he would seem to connect with more so. So, yeah, that was kind of one of our theories. We thought, well, maybe, you know, whether the children are aware that we're parents or whether there's just that kind of natural affinity, you know, between us because we've got children and the child spirits. I don't know.
Interesting.
It is interesting, yeah.
But that whole sort of almost telepathic content takes us on to the next room, the library that we went into, because that's one of the conversations, if I remember rightly, we were all having in there is, do spirits communicate with us telepathically, or do we somehow communicate with them? When we were doing some experiments using EVP and all thinking of the same word to see if we could imprint it on the recorder. Now, I'm not going to go too much into that because that was literally just a bit of a fun experiment. But what we decided to do... Now, what was that room originally? Do we know?
Well, the library was originally the entrance hall.
Right.
Because one of the stories about it is that a gentleman's seen in tweed walking a dog, and he goes through reception, through the library and out through the library bay window. And it confused people for years because, well, why on earth is he walking directly through the library and out onto the grounds? Well, of course, that was the door. That was the hallway. And there is actually a priest hole hidden behind that fireplace because there are loads of tunnels, which, again, someone said to me on the evening, actually, why would there be a priest hole in the hallway? That's right by the front door. I said, but yeah, they'd be everywhere. You know, they'd be anywhere. They wouldn't necessarily think, let's put a priest hole in a very dark, secret place, because that may well be the first place.
That's what I was going to say, hide in plain sight. It's always the mantra, isn't it? Always hide in plain sight. Oh, okay. Okay, well... I mean, we're talking about that. We know that the family were royalists, weren't we? The Shirley family were very, very strict royalists. We also know that there was a few untoward things that they got involved, that happened to them, such as, I believe one of them was the last ever English nobleman to be hanged for a felony. And it said he was hanged with a rope made from silk because of his rank and status. That would have been... Oh, what's his name? The fourth Earl.
It was Lawrence the fourth Earl, yeah. 1760, yes. He was known for having quite a temper. I think most of his staff were quite afraid of him, actually. But, he actually shot his estate steward, I think.
Yeah.
I think one of the staff had accepted a bad lot of oysters or something like that.
Yeah, I'm reading that at the moment. He was already in a bad mood. Yeah, he stabbed a servant for accepting a barrel of bad oysters from a delivery man. He then beat him with a candlestick and kicked him in the groin so fiercely that he was lame for life as a result. I mean, that's a pretty severe kicking to enable that.
Nice character.
Yeah, one that, what a shame he was hanged. But so there hasn't all been sweetness and light at this place even before the sort of the 20th century. Now, when we were in the library, you suggested something which I must admit I have never done in this form. I've done Estes, which is kind of desensitisation, isn't it, in a way? But you asked for 2 volunteers. Did you do this experiment with other groups as well?
Yes, I did it with one other group, right. And I've done it at places before, but my favourite, it was yours, you with Phil. It's just fascinating. As you say, it's this idea that let's scale it all back, let's take some senses away. I mean, some people think that, if you've got child spirits, for example, maybe they feel quite vulnerable or intimidated, and so by taking away your sense of sight, of sound, that you're making yourself vulnerable. And that makes you more appealing to them. I don't know about that. I think maybe it's more about you're just heightening your sense of awareness, your sense of touch and picking up on what's happening around you when you're not looking around and when you're not listening to what's happening.
I also think you're less open to pareidolia as well, because, isn't that what people like Gansfeld and all that in the psychiatrists and psychologist, and it's where Estes kind of got its thing from, by taking away external influence. You heighten a certain sense and you heighten your psychic prowess and all that kind of thing. But there is a photo. So we mentioned Steve Higgins' article. There is a photo of me and Phil sitting opposite each other with headphones and a blindfold on. I did start singing the Mr. and Mrs. song as we were sat there, and when I showed the photo to my husband over the weekend, he did like, what the are you doing? I kind of explained to him why I was blindfolded and had headphones on opposite a strange man.
It's not something you do every weekend, is it?
Not really. No, not really. No, every other weekend, but not every weekend. Yeah. But I know you guys. And the weird thing is, when you first get sort of put under, for want of a better term, you do start feeling your body twitch, and you're trying to work out if it is just your body trying to acclimatise the fact it can't hear properly anymore and it can't see, and you're sitting in sort of not an uncomfortable chair, but it's not a mega comfortable position, or whether things are starting to happen. And I had to think, when I thought about it afterwards, there was a couple of instances where it felt like my arm got touched, but I wasn't sure if I did or if it was just my nerves adjusting to the fact they couldn't see what was going on. So it may have been when you asked them to touch me and they actually then touch Phil. I don't know whether at that point, because there was a couple of times I thought I'd been touched. I mean, even when we were doing the energy circle out in the ruins of the chapel, I remember asking you when I opened my eyes, did you just touch my back?
Yes.
Do you remember that?
I forgot about that, yeah.
Because I felt someone touch my back, and the person next to me said, I felt someone walk past us. And I've looked at the photo since, and I could see where you were standing and you weren't moving.
Yeah.
So that was... that was really interesting. But so sitting there, no sight, no hearing, you're not talking, you're using signs and everything with everyone else to sort of get them to will spirits to do certain things. And I did feel my hand get tickled, as though someone was trying to turn my hand over. And I just turned it over and felt like someone was holding my hand. And I do remember feeling like someone was leaning over me. I thought it was one of you guys walking past us to check us. It really felt like I had a sense of someone being very, very close. But the thing I remember the most is at the very end, suddenly getting this searing pain going through my left wrist. Like someone had kind of either cut it or chopped it, like karate chopped it. That's the only way I can explain it. Because I was rubbing it, and I think it was Paula who said, "Why were you rubbing your wrist at the end?" I said, "Because it hurt. It suddenly had this searing pain, like someone had just done something to it. Really, it was an interesting experiment to do."
Yeah, and Phil said something along those lines, I'm sure, about his wrist. I seem to remember like it had been cut or something. Yeah. It was interesting. I mean, at one point when you said that you felt someone stood next to you, I'd actually asked for someone to come and stand next to you. The K2 meter that was on the bookcase to your left, that started lighting up. So we sort of like, I wonder, that was interesting just for those things to happen at the same time. But with your hand, and you mentioned the stroking, at one point I said, if there are any children here, you can come forward, you can hold their hand. And we also saw you turn your hand over. And I wanted to get a picture of it. I didn't have my phone with me, but how your hand was if you were holding a small hand.
That's what it felt like. Yeah.
Yeah. It's so interesting because I know that you weren't aware of the questions I was asking. I know you weren't aware of each other. You couldn't see our reactions in the room. So,
I'd actually shut my eyes as well under the blindfold because it's easier to have your eyes shut, especially when you've got mascara on your eyelashes and they was catching them. So I'd shut my eyes anyway under the blindfold. So no, I couldn't see anything because I know I brought my doll in. Just a doll I bought in a second-hand shop that I thought might work as a trigger. And I remember sitting that on the bookshelf next to the K2. And the minute I sat it next to the K2 started going off.
Yes.
And I was just like, that's interesting because there's nothing in that doll. It's just a bog standard doll. So yes, I would have said there was a childlike entity playing in the hallway.
Yeah. Isn't it interesting? It's so interesting. And again, that was an experiment that wasn't actually relying on anything, any tech of any kind, any gadgets. It was purely making you the focus, you volunteers and you the trigger.
Maybe interesting to video that next time.
Yes, it would actually. Yeah. Because you don't know what you'd pick up. I've got a feeling actually Graham may have been filming from the end of the room. I've not had his footage yet. I'll have to find out. Yeah, but I love that. I love doing that. I mean, it doesn't always work. And again, whether this is down to individual sensitivity. I did it later in the evening with a couple who they'd admitted that her husband was sceptical. He'd been dragged along. But he was up for it. He said, I'll give it a go. And nothing at all happened. Although I did see the lady the following morning at breakfast and she said, I did think at one point someone had stroked my hair, but I didn't want to say.
Oh, that was the other thing in the chapel, wasn't it? Do you remember? Yes. Just forgotten this. That you said something. You said someone's just breathed on. Wasn't it? You felt a breath
I heard someone breathe right next to me, to my right-hand side, and about half a second, literally after I said it, you sort of jumped and said, it's like someone's touched your hair.
Someone had played with my back of my hair, yeah. And you hadn't said anything. I think literally as I jumped and touched my hair, you went, oh. And it was kind of, it wasn't planned. I had my hair touched more than once on that whole night. There was definitely some interesting things going on. So that desensitization one was a really interesting experiment. And I must admit, if you're ever on an investigation and there's more than two of you, have a go at it because I suppose you could do it just one person sitting there and everyone else channeling the questions. It was quite, but you do have to trust the people you are with. You do have to relax because it's actually quite nerve-wracking to sort of lose all your senses in that respect.
Well, you're completely vulnerable, aren't you? I mean, we joked about it, at the beginning, this is when we all leave now, but actually you don't know. We may have all left. It's I
was quite proud of myself. I'm claustrophobic. I'm not the most trusting of souls either, and so I was quite proud of myself that I didn't suddenly rip the blindfold off at one point and say, "You all still here?" or something like that. I mean, but I could kind of. You said I couldn't see Phil, but I could kind of feel his breathing in front of me, if that makes sense, because we were sort of quite close. But it was an interest. It's definitely one I'm going to do again when I'm doing small investigations. I must admit, where I'll probably try and sort of get Wayne, my husband, blindfolded and headphones on just to sort of see if he'll trust me enough to do it because he's a real skeptic. So it'd be quite interesting to get him doing it.
Yeah, and if you can absolutely make sure as well that, you know, whoever is doing it can't hear you. I mean, the headphones I used were noise cancelling ones, so you wouldn't really need the earplugs, but I use those as well just because it's like belt and braces, isn't it? You know, you know for definite kind of thing that there's no. It's like when you with the Ouija boards, you know, the spirit boards and whatever. I don't tend to use them very often, but we had one there at Ettington in room 7, of course.
It was in room 7, yeah.
Yeah. But if I do use them myself, I like to try and make it a little bit different. So, you know, either everyone has to have a blindfold and then generally the messages don't make sense, or something that I did in December at a smaller venue was no one had blindfolds on, but I was holding up Zena cards. So I was at the other end of the room and I was just sort of asking out if there are any spirits here. Could you just spell out the shape that I'm holding up? So it's, you know, star, a circle, a square, the wavy lines. And I think 3 times out of 4 it was accurate. And I thought, well, that's higher than, you know, the probability just by chance alone.
Yeah.
And on one occasion, I actually held up the star and then I looked at it and it was yellow and we had a red light in the room and you couldn't really see it. And I thought, oh, no, I did want to hold the star up, but I won't because you can't really see it. So I held the red circle up instead. But the glass went to star. And I just thought, well, that's interesting because that is what I had in my mind. You know, that's the thought I was projecting. I was thinking about the star. So things like that, you know, it's trying to find different ways of doing things, isn't it?
And yeah.
Ways to kind of make it a bit more interesting for yourself as well.
No, I'm definitely going to do the desensitisation one on future investigations. Maybe not so much when it's group but public investigations I'm working with, because I tend to let them, unless they're running out of ideas. But I think some of the small ones I've got planned for my next book and everything else, I'm definitely going to give it a go just to see what happens. We talking about the sort of the history of the building again. I know we jumped through sort of 500-600 years quite fast, and we were mentioning about General Horatio, who fought at the Crimea, who was the person originally I thought was coming through in the chapel. Now, he's an interesting soul because his life was actually saved by his prayer book, wasn't it? Now, is it right that his brother Arthur had given him that prayer book?
I think it is, yeah, because he was a reverend, wasn't he, his brother? And I think he did because they kept, I mean, they would keep it anyway, I suppose. But yes, the prayer book caught the bullet that saved Horatio's life. And so they displayed it in the Long Gallery, which was the family museum. Yeah. So at one time, they had all of their sort of special family historical artefacts in there. They do say that there are still things hidden in there behind bookcases.
The panelling.
Yeah, we don't know. The prayer book, I think, is either lost or was stolen, unfortunately. But there has been a male figure seen in the Long Gallery, and we were kind of wondering.
Well, I'm going to come to that.
Okay. I won't jump ahead.
No, that's fine. That's fine. Now, one of the other things that Andy mentioned when we were sitting in the chapel talking about Horatio was we were calling him General and Colonel because that's what the plaque said he was. But Andy turned around and said, someone's telling me Major General. Have you ever heard of the rank? Major General. Now, I hadn't heard of it. I'd heard of Sergeant Major. I'd heard of General. I've heard of Major. I'd never actually heard of Major General. Neither had you, I believe, and nobody else in the room had heard of the rank of Major General. But when I got home over the weekend, I was Googling Horatio to see what I could find out. And he had been made a Major General. Because apparently the rank used to be, and it outranks a general, it used to be Sergeant Major General. And they decided to drop the Sergeant bit because it got confused with Sergeant Major and made it Major General. But the irony is a Major General outranks a general, but a Major doesn't outrank a general or something like that. Anyway, but he was made a Major General.
That's just, I mean, when you told me that, I just thought, wow, okay, yeah. I didn't know that. And like you, you know, on the night, I thought, Major General. I mean, I'm not, military history is not my thing really. I don't know a great deal, but I do know that, you know, the usual ranks that you hear about, you know, as you say, like Colonel, Sergeant Major. And I just hadn't heard. Never heard of a Major General. To me, it didn't make sense. No. It was like, well, those two things don't go together. But yeah, obviously they
so
do.
He had picked up on that, and that's what he was. He was a Major General. Apparently he was an acting Major General, and then because he apparently didn't do very well at school and all of that kind of thing, and he enrolled in the military, and his brigade platoon, whatever you'd call them, was apparently, it was quite a bad one when he first took it over. By the end of his tenure with them, they were one of the most successful units in the military. So he was obviously a very, very good leader, but it was the fact that, say, Andy came up with, why is he, there's someone's telling me Major General. I was like, I've never heard of that. And even Phil, who sort of knows a bit about the military as well, he's like, I'd never heard of that. None of us had heard of that rank. And it was only when I looked it up afterwards, it was like, wow, that makes sense. During the First World War, unusually for a stately home, it wasn't a hospital, it wasn't like a VAD hospital or anything like that, but it was actually lived in by an amazing lady who I would recommend you look up, because she's amazing, called Constance, who was the Duchess of Westminster. And I actually found a newspaper article, which I sent through to Jayne on this, where she actually opened her own hospital. Not Jayne, Constance did. You do look good for your age, mate, if you were opening a hospital in 1915. Wow. Yeah.
Either that or I'm a vampire. Keanu Reeves.
Well, he is, isn't he? He is a vampire. That guy, he's got a portrait of himself up in his loft. Only certain people get that joke. It's quite funny. She opened a hospital in Le Touquet. She'd actually separated from her husband at this point, but obviously in the early 1900s, divorce wasn't really the done thing. And she'd separated from him. She had to be separated from about 5 or 6 years before she was granted a divorce. But she'd opened this hospital in Le Touquet. And there's an advert for in the newspaper, her asking for pillows and donations and things so that she can use them, and people asked them to be sent to her secretary at Ettington Park. And she basically rented the house during the First World War as her offices, and because she spent a lot of time over in Le Touquet working in the hospital. And I know you and I were discussing a photo of her and saying what a beautiful, really beautiful woman she was.
Very beautiful, yes, very beautiful. But I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? You know, she was the Duchess of Westminster, and the picture we saw is in her tiara, and as you would expect. But obviously, day to day, she must have been very much a roll your sleeves up and get on with it kind of person.
I've got a picture of her in her nurse's uniform.
Oh, wow.
Do you want me to send it to you?
Yes,
okay, I'll send that to you. Yeah, I've got a picture. Well, it isn't even officially a nurse, because she worked almost as a skivvy in the laundry and things like that. Yeah, sorry about that. The recording cut out on us. So I think we're going to be... Anyway, so we're back in the Long Gallery. There's the SLS is picking up on a figure, because supposedly that's where Arthur, Horatio's brother, is meant to frequent. It was the library. There's a fireplace. Talking about Steve Higgins' article, he mentions that something along the floor that someone suggested was an elemental. I'm on his thing. I think it was just trying to map in the lights of the laser and some of the items that were on the floor. But what was interesting is I went to sit on a chair near to where Kay, one of your wonderful team, was standing. And I think it was Paula said, there's a figure standing there between you. It's quite obvious it's a figure. And so I suggested it came to sit on the chair next to where I was sitting, and they watched it sit down on the chair, almost as instructed. I'm kind of sceptical when it comes to anything like any gadget, because you just don't know what it's using to map that in. But I think when you ask something to do it and it does it, and it's obvious on the screen it's doing it, it's almost hard to sort of argue that it's not real.
Yeah, yeah. I'm like you, I think, Penny. I'm when I see, especially, you know, I've seen a lot of SLS footage over time since they've been popular, you know, especially the last couple of years. And you see things, you know, it will map a coat stand, it will map an easel. There are so many things that it will bring up as a human form that aren't. One of the most intriguing times I've used an SLS camera was when we were in a basement. I was with Chris, and he was using it, and he was literally just up against a completely plain brick wall with nothing, you know, not even a nail in the wall, nothing for it to map, and suddenly this very tall figure appeared, and I just couldn't explain, well, what's that picking up on then? There's nothing else that could possibly be. But yeah, it's the times when you see these figures, and as you say, they seem to interact. You know, I've seen some where they will sit next to people and you'll hold your hand out, you know, and say, can you reach out to touch my hand? And you see the stick figure do the same. Of course, I suppose it's like anything else. We don't know. It's no cast iron proof. We don't know 100% that that's what it's doing. But when you get instances like that, as you say, that you can't really... explain and say, well, actually, you know, no, that's a chair or that's a door or I think it's just the bookcase it's picking up on, then it's intriguing and it keeps you interested, doesn't it?
Especially when the camera's static. It was put on a table. It wasn't being moved. So it's not like it's struggling to map in every 2 seconds. It was literally on a table, static at a certain angle, not being touched. And the chair had been in the shot, that I'd been in the shot, Kay had been in the shot. It wasn't like anything was happening different.
Yeah.
It does make me wonder. And now that was also what was interesting, because Andy had written on his picture of Horatio, Arthur.
Oh, yes.
And obviously Arthur was Horatio's brother.
Yeah. Yeah, that is interesting. And of course, these, I mean, I know, you know, names like Arthur and George and Henry, they're common and they were common in that family. Horatio isn't.
No.
And I know, you know, he didn't come through with Horatio, but the fact that it all seemed to link, I mean, I think very much the character that Andy drew, I found a photograph, which I think I showed you, of Horatio, and right down to the, you know, the mutton chops on his face and the what he was wearing and everything.
Yeah,
so
yeah, it's very, very spooky, very spooky.
It is, yeah.
In a good way.
In a good way. Always a good way.
Always a good way. Right, room 7. Did you get to investigate room 7 on the evening?
Not on Friday. I didn't go in there. No, I have done before, but not on Friday. It's apparently the most haunted room in the hotel. And despite being one of the smallest and probably the least glamorous, they say that it's the one that's requested the most.
Well, we got told, I think it was Craig told us, it's also one that if someone goes in it, they always make sure they've got a spare room to put them into afterwards because it's got the highest checkout rate. Now,
that's right.
I'll be honest, I didn't pick up on much in there when I walked in. It just felt like a small little hotel room to me, but it was where I probably had the most experience that made me nearly wet myself.
Here we go.
I've got to tell this story. I have got to tell this story now. I do adore Jayne's husband, Simon. He is lovely. He's a lovely guy. He's you know that, and he's tall, so he can reach stuff for us. It's great.
He's good at carrying things. He's very handy to have around.
He looks a handy chap. Yeah, husbands are good for that sort of thing. Anyway. So we're in this room. It's not a very big hotel room. I've actually had to take my jumper off in it. It's that warm, which of course prompted the da-da-da-da song from the others. And so I just obliged them with putting it through my legs and pretending to grind on my jumper just to keep the laughter going, as you do.
Now, why didn't we have a camera in that room?
That's what they said at that point. They went, damn, hold on. I went, I'm too quick for you. But yes, so it was very warm. Now, Mark is one of Barry's team normally, isn't he? Mark and I are right by the door of the room and we're looking at the aircon unit trying to work out how to turn the temperature down a little bit more because we're all sweating at this point. And I can't remember what the others were doing. I think they were doing a silent sort of EVP session, if I remember rightly. But Mark and I right by the door and we're staring intently, and I mean intently, at this unit, trying to use the light off his phone so that we don't bother the others. As we look and see the handle of the door to the room slowly turning. It was like something you get out of a horror film. Do you know what I mean? It was so slow. And we are literally standing there just watching it go, what? And then as it opens, there's still no voice. There's still no hello. The door just starts to open. Mark and I are standing. Now, Mark's a bit jumpy. I'm not normally that bad. And in walks Simon. To say...
He can always be relied on.
I think Mark and I both squealed slightly. We didn't scream or anything. I think we both did a like that because we were so concentrated. What the hell is opening the door? Because there was no noise. He's incredibly quiet. Mark sort of fell back against the wall holding his chest. I literally just dropped to the floor laughing. I could not stop laughing. It was honestly one of the funniest things that's ever happened. It was just how slowly it was done. The handle, I have never seen a handle turn that carefully and that slowly. The only thing I can think about is Simon good at creeping in on the girls when they're asleep to check they're okay. It was that
you wouldn't
kind of
know,
move.
would you?
It was that kind of move.
I can only imagine from he probably thought you were all huddled at the other end, and he was coming in to check whether you're ready to switch around or something. Yeah. And you two were both exactly on the other side of the door. That's hilarious.
I know. I think it made him jump as well. The fact the two of us went as he came in. He didn't expect to have us there on the other side. But it was just the fact that the door was so slowly, the handle going down so slowly, and the door opening so carefully, and no sound, no person, no nothing. And
now, do you know, it's a good job then that I hadn't told you the story about that room before you went in, because anyone who's seen in the 90s sometime, there was a very, very short Carol Vorderman snippet that she did at Ettington Park. And in that room, there was a guy talking about his experience. And he'd seen a woman out of the window actually walking across the landing,
glowing or something, wasn't she? Glowing, like an internal light. Yeah.
He saw the light come under the door, and he went to the door and slowly opened it, and then there she was in a silent scream. Now, if you'd known that,
I did know that story. Craig had told us it. Yes.
Okay. Oh dear.
No, it was just so funny. It was just, I couldn't stop giggling even afterwards. Every time I thought of it, and then when I think it was Paula said, "Penny, don't wet yourself." And I went, I'm middle-aged and I've had 2 kids. I can't promise anything right now, but at least there was a toilet in that room. If I'd had to, I would have gone into the bathroom. But it was just one of those, even Mark and I, for the rest of the evening, we'd just look at each other and start giggling, because it was so funny. It was so fun. Now, that room was quite quiet, although we did have some EVP stuff. We did have the K2s going off in there, but we managed to debunk that because there was a Wi-Fi unit in there which was triggering them. Now, I say about asking strange questions on EVPs, don't ask the bog standard ones. One of the spirits, I believe, in that one's meant to have laid someone's a bathing suit out and put toothpaste on someone's toothbrush, and
that's right. Apparently, a member of the Shirley family from America was staying in that room, and she said she had weird things happening, including a soaking wet bath suit, swimsuit appearing in the bathroom. Yeah.
Now, I decided that maybe that wasn't a spirit trying to scare people. Maybe that was a spirit who's trying to be nice, and that was the question I asked. I don't believe you're trying to frighten people. I believe you're trying to be hospitable to make their stay as nice as possible. And it got an answer, but we couldn't quite work out on the recorder what the answer was. But that got an answer. Out of all the questions that were asked, that got the answer. So it's interesting, because I thought that maybe the things that he was doing, it wasn't scary stuff. It's almost like what a caring person would do to make your stay nice.
Yes. Well, yeah. I mean, we used to live in a small little old cottage. Simon and I, it was our first house, and the things that used to go on there, they scared us to begin with, but then we soon realised that actually we took it as there was a little old lady who used to live there who was probably just still pottering around, because things would just move. You know, I had a plate rack and they'd be put in a different order, and you know, the light would go off in the bathroom if I'd left it on, and that kind of stuff. And it was like you say, it was just like someone was just there, just trying to be helpful.
Yeah.
But I think it's interesting when you choose the questions to ask when you're doing EVPs. You do the right thing, don't you? Because you think about, okay, well, what's relevant to this particular room, or who may be here and why they do things, not just, you know, can you tell us your name, or, you know, but it's actually, why did you do this? Where were you? What happened?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we've only got 4 minutes left. So we didn't have much happen in the indoor chapel. It was a bit sort of, even when I know you guys went off to another bit at the end and we stayed in there, it was still quite quiet. We had some EVP stuff, but nothing. Well, an EVP screaming at us to get out was the common one. What you're going back in March?
Yes.
I believe. Is that sold out yet, or?
It is, yeah. Friday the 13th.
There you go.
Yes. But yeah, I'm hopefully going to look at going back again, maybe take smaller groups throughout the year, 2 or 3 times-ish if we can. So yeah, I'm not hanging up my hat for Ettington just yet. I feel like I've only just scratched the surface.
Definitely. I wouldn't mind getting back into that chapel, the outdoor chapel again.
Yes.
Because I think that's where my contacts lay, so to speak.
Very much so. Yeah. Well, you're welcome. Obviously, whenever we go back, you fancy a little road trip again, just come and join us.
Thank you. So, I mean, your series Help My House is Haunted has just finished. I know we were, a lot of people were asking you last week, is there going to be another one? Is there going to be another one? And you went, watch this space. Was kind of what you were saying. Again, paraphrasing what you were saying. What else have you got going on at the moment, Mrs. H?
Well, this year we've got lots of events, and we've got 3 weekends. So we did one weekend last year, the gruesome Gloucestershire. That was brilliant. We've got lots of the same people, funnily enough. We're going to the Forest of Dean at the end of Feb for the Mystical Forest weekend, which I'm really looking forward to, because that's going to be a little bit different. It's kind of chilled, relaxed time away from the madness. And then we're back at Ettington in March. We're going to Dudley Castle in March as well, which I'm really looking forward to, because believe it or not, even though I'm a Black Country girl, I've never investigated Dudley Castle.
Really?
I know. Who'd have thunk it? No, I've been during the day.
You told me off because I said you were a Brummie. I did that deliberately because I knew Brummies Black Country people get annoyed when I call them Brummies.
Yeah, but you see, you Essex girls, you're always like that, aren't you?
Just antagonistic, yep.
Touche. Yes, so that's that, Dudley Castle. And then in April, we're going to Glastonbury. I can't wait for the Glastonbury weekend.
Wow.
We're staying at the George and Pilgrims, which is a 14th century hotel. So that should be good. So lots of events and bits and bobs going on. Don't know about Series 3 yet. So, yeah, we'll just see. We'll just see what happens. Really excited to go to Drakelow in June with Barry and his team.
That sold out as well, isn't it? Didn't that sell out within like 2 days or something ridiculous?
Oh, it's 4 hours.
4 hours?
It's just mental. I think, it did. It was it took us by surprise. And I was foolishly, I said to Barry, oh, yeah, we'll put it on my website. You can go through mine. I'll do the emails and stuff. And then I just literally sat there and watched the emails appearing in my inbox, like ping, 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 ping. Like, oh, I'm going to be busy.
My out of office is on.
Yeah.
Oh wow! Well, it sounds so good, so good. I'm so pleased to hear how busy you are. Well, if anyone wants to contact Jayne, you can go through the HD Paranormal Facebook page. You've also got the Jayne Harris page that people can contact you on. But I would say keep an eye on what this lady is doing, because she deserves this, and she is genuinely one of the nicest people I've met. No affectation at all, at all. Well, you didn't. I thought you were a damn good actress, girl. Because I just found you so down to earth and honest and fun and friendly, and one of the guys. It was really, really good to see. So yeah, that's all.
I'll pay you later. Checks in the post.
Oh, cool. It's signed this time, is it?
That's it. Yeah.
You did sign it this time. Okay.
I did.
Well, that's been the lovely Jayne Harris, also known as Lacey. The Lacey to my acne. I'm never going to stop using that now. I quite like that.
Bless you. I love it. I can't look at a picture of them two now without thinking of you. It's quite hilarious.
I can't.
But I mean, I'd prefer a nicer hairdo, but never mind.
Well, bear in mind that was the era. She'd look more like you now with your amazing hair. So we've got to get a picture of one of their iconic pictures, you and I together, and send it to Andy.
In the same pose.
Yeah,
we need to do one. Yeah. That's definitely
next time we meet up, we've got to do that and send it to Andy. It'll probably end up in Haunted Mag or something ridiculous. That's a point. You're on the cover of this issue of Haunted Mag as well, aren't you?
Oh, we are, yeah, looking suitably spooky next to a gravestone.
Yeah, loitering with those 2 boys who keep following you around.
I know, yeah, my stalkers.
Anyway, I must close this show out. Because believe it or not, Jayne and I are pre-recording this, as you can probably tell, because of the system sort of decided to blip out on me as I was recording, because we both got to do the school run. We do have responsibilities. So that's been the amazing and gorgeous and lovely Jayne Harris of HD Paranormal. We've been talking about Ettington Park. There is so much more you can learn about this place if you're interested. We really did literally touch the surface for you. So do keep an eye on things, and do have a read of Steve Higgins' article on Higgy Pop about the night. I promise you I was in his group, even though he didn't mention my name. Next week, I'm going to be talking to Aidan Sinclair, who is the resident illusionist on the Queen Mary that's moored in Los Angeles. It's going to be a fascinating one, I can tell you. He's a very interesting character, so don't forget about that one. Tomorrow night you've got the PSH radio show, then you have the Dark Mirror show on Friday. Don't forget to grab a copy of the new Parasearch book, the book of Parasearch. Don't forget to grab a copy of my new book, A Haunted Experiment. Let me know what you think about both of those. And until next week, my lovelies, have a good evening, sleep tight, and don't worry too much about things that go bump in the night.
Thank you for listening. Don't forget to join us for more shows throughout the week. Find us on Facebook, Twitter, and the World Wide Web to keep up to date with all the shows right here on Parasearch Radio.